Late last night, about 10:45, the Phillies sent out a very sad press release to alert that Darren Daulton had passed at the age of 55 years old after a 4-year battle with brain cancer. A 25th round selection of the Phillies. He made his debut in 1983, but was really known for his role on the 93 team, which really he burst out in 1992. And Chris Wheeler called just about every one of his games, and he's here to share some moments of Darren Daulton with us. Wheels, you know, for a while there, Darren was the guy who just hit eighth in the lineup. He was the eighth hitter, and he was the catcher. Then I remember one crazy afternoon, I looked at the lineup, and he was hitting second all of a sudden. And I said, what the heck are they doing, putting Darren Daulton in the two-hole? And he kind of took off from that moment and became Dutch.
Well, you laid it out there great. You know, every time I hear somebody, I talk to so many people today say, you know, he dies at age 55. You know, that's just so stunning because, you know, he had so much more life and so much more to give. But, yeah, he was just a 25th round pick, nothing special, kind of a shy kid from Kansas, a fringe prospect at best. A nice kid from the first time I ever met him. I'll never forget, you know, he had a big smile, would always shake your hand, remember names. And he was one of those guys you rooted for. You hope, geez, I hope this guy can make it. If he doesn't make it with the Phillies, I hope he can make it in the big leagues because he's a good guy. And as you kind of detailed there, you know, he started slowly and then he kind of found himself and he learned to hit the ball the other way instead of hooking everything foul. And once he did that, boy, he became a heck of a player. And he's a tough guy behind the plate too.
He sure was. And, you know, a lot of people laud him for his role on that 93 team, being the leader. But before that, was it evident that this guy was the leader, even though his numbers didn't support that?
You know, I've been asked that so much, and my answer is no. I mean, to me, Darren was a reluctant participant in what he became. He was one of the more unlikely guys I've ever been around to become what he became in this market. And that's to go from being a nice guy, kind of a team guy, to being a tough guy and the focal point of things, because that was not his style. His style was to just be one of the boys and just blend in and do what he did and enjoy his life. And Jimmy asked a lot of him for Gosi in 1993 when they had that bunch that Lee Thomas put together, and you could see in spring training that they had a chance to be pretty good. But, boy, they needed somebody to run roughshod over them, and Jimmy didn't want to do it, and he didn't want to have Vuk and Bowen. All the coaches have to do it all the time. So he kind of asked Darren to be more than he was in his personality and the way he would take charge of some things. And darn if he didn't do it. And boy, he became a leader in that clubhouse. You know, anybody who was around him will tell you he didn't yell, he didn't scream, but he had a way of telling somebody, you know, keep your head up, you're doing okay, or jumping somebody. And it was back in the day when they weren't so darn sensitive, the way all athletes, not all, but the way athletes seem to be in every sport now. And they police themselves. Boy, they would jump each other. And they don't do that now. And he was a perfect guy to do it, as it turned out. But, no, I would have never looked at Darren Daulton as a young player coming up and as a person that he was to be that guy.
Chris Wheeler is with us, of course, the former Phillies color analyst for many years with the Phillies. In fact, he came up in '83, did Darren Daulton. He played a couple of games, but really it wasn't until almost 10 years later that he really burst out and had that all-star year. He's a Silver Slugger. He leads the league in RBIs. He's in the top 10 RBI or MVP there. Really, what do you think kind of was there a switch, something that kind of just happened for him when he finally was able to become this rock for this team for a couple of years there? I mean, he was the guy in the middle of the lineup.
Yeah, you could sort of see it coming in the late 80s that he's becoming a better player and more confident. And as I said, his hitting style started to change where he didn't go up there. Believe me, he would have been a guy nowadays that would have been a shift on because he pulled everything. But if you remember, he started to drive the ball the other way. He went back and forth with knee injuries, too. I know you're a fan, Mike, and you remember all the knee injuries he had.
Yeah.
And when he was going through those periods of knee injuries and knee rehabs and all that, he lost his base. He didn't have his legs. You know, you can't hit without your legs. And there were times when it started to come back for him, and then he would get hurt again. And I think he had a period of time there in the 90s there where he was healthier than he'd been in a while, and he was able to fight through some other things because he caught all the time too. That not only and he wasn't the biggest guy in the world. He was tall, and he used to have ice packs all over. He looked like a mummy when you go in that the way he was wrapped. Stuff was wrapped around him. You go in that clubhouse trying to get himself ready to play and after games. But I think he figured a few things out, and mentally he figured the game out a little bit. He also found out how to take charge behind the plate and take a lot of inexperienced pitchers and make them pretty good. That staff in '93 wasn't the greatest, except you could see Schilling was going to be special. But those other guys were pretty good, but none of them were special. And he had a way of really handling that pitching staff, too.
Chris Wheeler with us. Wheels, when you look at that 93 bunch, I mean, it was a bunch of cast-offs, vagabonds. We know the story, but can you give us some story about how Daulton was able to tie them all together?
Well, you know what? People talk about lead. I always said leaders can't be you can't be a pitcher and be a leader. You can't be a relief pitcher and be a leader. You can't be a bench guy. You got to be an everyday player. You got to be somebody that goes out there and goes through the wars day after day after day. And a catcher, they're tough anyway. Anybody can go out there and catch in the big leagues and catch as much as they did then, or as much as he tried to do. I think he was looked up to because of his mental and physical toughness. And then when he was asked, as I said, when he was asked to do what Jimmy asked him to do and go in there and tell somebody to get off their butt and go out and take extra hitting or what are you doing running through the stop sign, or why don't you take an extra base? You've got ability to do that. Why are you stopping at second? Those kind of things. They would listen to him. There were some big guys in that clubhouse. You look at Pete Incaviglia and Dave Hollins and guys like that. But Dutch was physically imposing himself. And I think they really didn't know whether he was going to fight him or not, because he wouldn't back down from anybody. And he wasn't a guy that had fights per se, but I don't think any of them really wanted to test him. And that combination of things and his own ability that he could take it out on the field and also perform himself to a high level, I think it all just kind of fell together. As I said, Mike, he not the kind of guy, believe me, to the day, that we lost him yesterday, he was never a tough guy. He was never a big loudmouth guy. He didn't have a whole lot of insecurities. He was a guy that just all he wanted to do is go out and do his own thing, do his own job, have a good life, and play a game that he really loved. And they asked a little more of him, and he did. And Jim Leland did too. That's one of the reasons why Jimmy Leland wanted him down there in '97. And he really contributed to that team, and he won his World Series ring that year with the Marlins.
Yeah, played in all 7 games, hit about 400 in that series with them. Hit that home run in Game 3, I remember. And that by then he was even learning to play some outfield. I think they were playing him in right field and stuff. But
right field.
You read a lot.
A little bit, and it didn't work out real well. But for a short period of time like that, it did, because they wanted to get him in the lineup, and they had the DH obviously in the World Series because when he was playing Cleveland, and he was able to do that too. So yeah, but I remember when Leland got him, he was asking our people, Jimmy admired him from afar, but he said, "Is this for real? Is this guy really what we think he is?" Oh yeah, everybody told him, yeah. So he did everything he could to get him down there for that part of the year and into the postseason, and it sure helped the Marlins.
I think in reading a lot of the things the Phillies sent out today that former teammates had mentioned, many of them talk about leader, which we've discussed, but a lot of them attribute to him. Tommy Green said, "I wouldn't be where I am today if not for Darren." And I said, how many years I bumped into him down in Clearwater, and he would smile and shake your hand. I mean, that was, like you say, that he was such a nice guy that he remembered you from the years before. Oh, you're the guys from New Jersey that come down. I mean, so that's the kind of person he was off the field, and it seems that his teammates really respected that about him.
Yeah, that's one of the things I keep pointing out today, without trying to get emotional about him, that he was a sweet guy. This tough guy role was not him. It just was not Darren. It was not something he was really comfortable with. He was a considerate person. He was kind. You're reading the stories about him, made me laugh today. I can still feel it. You'd see him, and I was one of the guys that called him Bubba. A few of us called him Bubba. He liked that. So I said, "Hey, Bubba," and he always would give you that big hug and the kiss on the cheek. And man, he was strong when he'd hug you too. And I think, oh no, here he comes. You're going to get the kiss on the cheek and the hug now. But it was just his way. He meant it. And when he knew you and he cared about you, he wanted to show you that. It wasn't like, I don't think Darren ever wanted to go, he didn't know he was going to go so young, but ever wanted to go and have people wonder where they stood with him. You knew where you stood with him all the time. And that's the point I was trying to make to you about with other people, Mike, what you're just saying, that he would remember you. He might not remember your name when you went down there, but he knew you, and he knew where you were from, and he would smile and shake your hand, and he would do things. He would do interviews. He would do, he would go out of his way to try and help people. So, look, he had his dark periods. We all know that. They're well publicized. But he came through the other side, and he was a happy guy when he unfortunately developed this darn brain cancer. And, we've lost a couple of wonderful people in Book and Tug, too, and now this guy. And it just really hurts.
Yeah, David Montgomery said, Wheels, that it's one of the toughest decisions as a team president was to approve the trade of Daulton to the Marlins in '97. I guess shows the impact that Daulton made on the organization, even later on his career when he obviously was slowing down. He had the 9 different knee surgeries. But to say, look, I didn't want to give up to prove that trade because he meant that much to us.
He did, and he also saw that maybe he had a chance to win. And David is another very kind person who's unfortunately had a bout with cancer. It seems like it gets the good people. And David is doing real well right now, and we're real thankful for that. But I think he recognized in the Marlins, they were a team that, you didn't know they're going to win the World Series and all the crazy things that happened with them. But they were a wild card team, for crying out loud, and they won the World Series. But I think he saw they had a chance to, let's put it this way, to get into postseason, and Darren maybe could get into postseason one more time before his career was over. And Jim Leland really pushed for it, so it all worked.
Do you have a favorite Dutch playing day story?
Favorite playing day? People keep asking. My memories of it are so much.
It sounds like we might be having a bad connection here with Chris Wheeler. We'll see if we can't maybe get him to connect and give us a, because so many people have those, travel stories, something that were on the bus or on the airplane or inside the locker room, something like that. So we'll see if we can have Wheels tell us a quick Daulton story, because so many of them out there, but, something that maybe, nobody's really heard before.
Well, it's not that you haven't heard it, because I will never forget the day. It was a smoking hot day in 1993. I think it was either June or July, and we were in St. Louis on that brutal turf. It was a day game, and they had given Schilling a good lead, and he was out there. It had something to do with the All-Star game. I'm trying to remember whether he had been left off the All-Star team or was trying to make the All-Star team and was struggling. But anyway, it was Schill a little bit being Schill about being just for himself. And Darren didn't want any part of that. And he went out to that mound and he chewed him out as well as any catcher I've ever seen get on a pitcher. We had, even back then you had cameras on everything and you could lip read him. He wasn't a huge cusser, but he was getting on him pretty good. And I think Schill may have even mentioned that that helped him. That, Kurt Schilling, you talk about a rockhead, headstrong and wanting to do things his own way. Well, even as a young guy, as he was back then, it was going to be his way. Well, no, it wasn't. It wasn't going to be his way with Darren Daulton back there. Darren Daulton was going to tell you, here's what you need to do to be good, because Dutch will tell you he knew he was going to be really good, just not a regular pitcher. So he jumped him that day, and that was part of the whole thing with them, Mike, that they weren't afraid to get on each other, and you were going to be a team. You weren't going to be an individual on that 93 bunch. And if Schill didn't want to understand that, he was going to understand it. And if he had to embarrass him in public, he did.
Great stuff. Chris Wheeler here on the day where we're remembering one of the great Phillies from a era that is much different from the era we're in now. Darren Daulton, he actually said, hey, I learned the old school way to play. I came up with Schmidt and Rose and Carlton and those guys in that locker room. It had to be an eye-opening experience for a 21-year-old kid to jump in there. And then, of course, he was doing the same for many later on in his career. Chris Wheeler called virtually every one of his games, right? I mean,
I saw him from the first day he came to camp as a roster player, and met him that day. And I've told people today doing shows like yours, Mike, that he was a fringe guy. He's a 25th round pick. There was no big prospect involved, but he was such a sweet guy. He was one of those guys you said, God, I hope he makes it big leagues. Or if he doesn't with us, I hope he makes it with somebody, because this is a guy that can contribute to our business, to our industry. And then when he became a star with the Phillies, it was everything he could hope you'd be. He gave a lot to the game. He gave a lot to the public, and they're going to miss him.
Well, Chris, we appreciate you spending a couple of moments with us here and helping our listeners remember Dutch very fondly. Thank you so much.
My pleasure, Mike. It's great to talk about him. It's therapeutic.